Ever wonder what really built the Roman Empire? It wasn't just emperors and legions. It was an invisible workforce, millions strong, living in chains and fear. The story of Rome is written on the backs of its slaves. Today, we're uncovering 10 shocking facts about their daily lives that history class never taught you. And trust me, the last one will completely change how you see ancient Rome. So, let's start with a brutal reality. Slaves were legally considered property, instrumentum vocale, talking tools. Think about that. You could be bought, sold, or even killed with little to no consequence for your owner. A master could order a slave's death for something as minor as breaking a dish. There was no concept of human rights for them. They were objects, plain and simple. Now for fact number 2, not all slaves were the same. We often picture them toiling in mines or fields, and many did. These were the most brutal jobs with the shortest life expectancies. Imagine working 18 hours a day in a dark, suffocating mine, chained to the person next to you, knowing you'd likely die there. But on the other end of the spectrum, some slaves were highly educated Greeks, doctors, teachers, accountants. They might live in relative comfort within a wealthy household, but they were still property. Their skills made them valuable, but never free. A doctor's slave could save his master's life one day and be sold the next. Let's move to fact number 3. The sheer number of slaves is staggering. By the late Republic, some historians estimate that slaves made up as much as 30 to 40% of the population in Italy. In a city of 1 million people like Rome, that's up to 400,000 slaves. They were everywhere. They cooked the food, cleaned the houses, raised the children, built the aqueducts, and rowed the warships. Roman society literally could not have functioned without them. This complete dependence on slave labor is something we often overlook. Fact 4. How did one become a slave? The most common way was through warfare. When Rome conquered a territory, entire populations could be enslaved. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children would be marched back to Rome in chains and sold in the market. Another way was being born into it. If your mother was a slave, you were automatically a slave, regardless of who your father was. It was a life sentence from birth. And sadly, some people were sold into slavery by their own impoverished parents, or were abandoned as infants and picked up by slave traders. Number 5 on our list is about their personal lives, or lack thereof. Slave marriages weren't legally recognized. A master could pair up slaves for breeding purposes, just like livestock, to produce more slaves for his household. Families were constantly torn apart. A mother could see her child sold off to a different owner, never to see them again. The emotional and psychological trauma of this is hard to even comprehend. They were denied the basic human connection of a stable family. Let's talk about resistance, which brings us to fact number 6. Did slaves fight back? Absolutely. The most famous example is Spartacus, who led a massive slave revolt that shook the Roman Republic to its core. But most acts of resistance were smaller and more personal. They would work slowly, pretend to be sick, break tools, or steal from their masters. In the most extreme cases, a slave might try to poison their owner, but this was incredibly risky. If a slave killed their master, Roman law dictated that every single slave in that household, hundreds of them, could be executed as a punishment and a warning to others. Fact 7 reveals a glimmer of hope. Manumission, the act of freeing a slave. It wasn't common, but it did happen. A slave could save up the tiny allowance or peculium they were sometimes given, and by their own freedom. A master might free a loyal slave in their will as a sign of affection or for status. Female slaves were sometimes freed to be married by their former masters. But even after being freed, they weren't fully Roman citizens. They became freedmen or freedwomen, a social class that still carried the stigma of their past. Their children, however, would be born as full citizens. For fact number 8, which is about their appearance. Slaves were often marked to show their status. Collars were common. Some were simple iron rings, while others were more elaborate with inscriptions like Tine mi quia, Fugiet, Revoca miad, Dominum meum, Reventium, and Arie Calisti, which means hold me, for I have fled, and return me to my master. Reventius on the estate of Callistus. Imagine wearing a metal tag that identifies you as a runaway. Some slaves were even branded with tattoos on their faces, a permanent mark of shame that made it impossible to ever truly escape their identity. Let's dive into number 9. The diet of a Roman slave. It was basic and monotonous, designed for fuel, not pleasure. The staple was a coarse grain, usually wheat or barley, made into porridge or rough bread. They might get some olives, figs, and cheap wine mixed with water. Meat was a rare luxury. In the countryside, they might forage for greens or snails. In the mines, the rations were even worse. Malnutrition was rampant, and it was just one more factor that contributed to their short, brutal lives. Compare that to their masters, who were feasting on exotic dishes at lavish banquets. And finally, the moment you've been waiting for. The 10th and most shocking fact about Roman slaves. You might think the most terrifying thing was the beatings or the hard labor, but it was something more psychological. Roman society actively worked to strip slaves of their identity. Upon being enslaved, they were given a new, simple Latin name. Their connections to their family, their culture, their language, and their past were deliberately severed. They were forced to forget who they were. This systematic dehumanization was perhaps the cruelest part of Roman slavery. It wasn't just about controlling their bodies. It was about conquering their minds and erasing their very being. From talking tools to erased identities. The lives of Roman slaves were a stark and brutal reality that powered one of history's greatest empires. The Colosseum, the aqueducts, the roads we still marvel at today, all were built on a foundation of human suffering. It's a dark truth, but one we must remember. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this as fascinating and horrifying as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which fact shocked you the most. See you next time.